Hello again, Periscope. We're ready for a second serving of our 3 Periscope extravaganza for Museum Week at the British Museum. Oh, we're having a bit of fun with the camera, but don't worry, we are not going to be that, distracted. We're not going to be that out of focus. We're about to just hone down on some ancient script. But before we do, welcome to Behind the Scenes in the Middle East Department. This is, in my opinion at least, probably the most beautiful library in London. It's just... yeah, I just really like it. You can imagine pretending to be Belle in Beauty and the Beast and doing a little song about books. It's fantastic. Anyway, more seriously, we are here to learn about cuneiform with the wonderful Dr. Irving Finkel. If you have any questions, the guy knows practically everything there is to know about the 130,000 cuneiform tablets that are in this room. And I'm once again going to stop talking and hand you over to the legend that is Irving Finkel. But before we do, this is called the Art Stream. Can you tell why?
Okay, well, the art room is very beautiful, but it's also very important because it has in it a complete collection of real treasure. Because we have in this very room the largest collection of ancient writings from ancient Mesopotamia, that's to say the Sumerians and the Babylonians, which started before 3000 BC and lasted till the time of the Romans, the oldest writing system in the world, written on lumps of clay that look most unappetizing. We have in this room about 130,000 pieces, and they cover every aspect of ancient life, and they are full of amazing things. And I'm afraid to say, what I do for a living is to read them. So I brought one to show you so you can see what they look like. I can't show you all 130,000 because everybody would go to sleep, but I've got a rather good one in this rather special box. Actually, this tablet has recently been given to us. Even though we have a huge collection, we're always looking for new bits of things that we don't have before. And an old lady came in. Her father bought this in the 1930s, kept it in a special box and gave it to us when, in her will. She left it to us as part of our collection. So this is, in a way, our latest acquisition for ancient writing. Now, I better get it the right way up, otherwise it's rather embarrassing. So this is quite a small tablet. It's made of clay. It's been written on very carefully by a scribe who impresses these signs in neat rows from left to right all the way along the front, turns it over, writes all the way along the back and puts the date at the bottom because it's a legal document and it has to make the point clear without any loopholes. And this was used among the banking family as a record of one of their transactions in about 550 BC, so a very long time ago. And everybody who was concerned with this activity was as careful about it as people are today, because when money was paid for a debt, for example, everybody had to acknowledge it, so the person couldn't come back later and say, well, you never paid me, here is the proof, one of these documents. And they are so durable that today we can still read these messages, even though everybody's been dead for more than 2,000 years. So in this room, which is a nice piece of Victorian architecture, we have 3 floors of inscriptions. Some are printed books of the kind you find in a normal library, and some are journals. But on the ground floor, in all these cases, we have bits of clay with this kind of writing on. And some are small and pocket-sized, like this one, and some are really too heavy to handle in one hand. And they cover all sorts of aspects of life, not just the business and the economic and the legal, but also we have poetry, we have love songs, we have stories, we have magic, we have medicine, we have all sorts of things. And in fact, the population of ancient Iraq relied on this clay as their writing system, and it's a marvelous thing that they did because it lasts in the ground. And if they'd written on paper like we do, or bone, or leather, or ivory, all that would have perished and we wouldn't have anything. But what we have now is a kind of window, and when you open this window you can talk to these people and find out not only what they did, but what they thought about and what they were frightened of, and you can speak to these people across all the centuries. Of course, if you start speaking to objects in the museum, people will say, there's a mad curator who's lost sense of reality. But nevertheless, it is possible to meet these people through this marvellous bridge of their writing and somehow converse with them.
Someone would like to know, what is the language? Can you tell us more about
Very good question. Well, in fact, there are 2 possible languages. This tablet here is written in Babylonian, And the Babylonian language is related to modern languages like Arabic and Hebrew. It's a Semitic language. But the same writing system was also used on clay tablets to write Sumerian. Older tablets are in Sumerian, which is a totally different language. So there were two languages, one much more accessible to us and one much more difficult. And learned people and scribes and well-educated people had to know both the languages. So, you may think, when you see a thing like this, if you saw it in a market, you wouldn't turn it over. Some people think they look like dog biscuits. Some people think they look like Weetabix or something like that. But actually, they are manuscripts. They are handwritten by a trained person. And one of the interesting things about it is we know about the schooling they had to go through in order to become proper scribes. And they had a good technique in the classroom. There were never many pupils. And a young person was taught by a boy who was slightly older, and then when he'd done his day's exercise, the teacher would come round armed with a cudgel, and he would look over the shoulder of the pupil and see what kind of work he'd done, and if it was good, he would pass on, and if it wasn't, he would get a clout from this stick. A very good system, because it makes children at school concentrate. I think in a way there might be a good argument for reintroducing this system to make people learn something.
Irving, if I want to know more about Sumerian, can you explain that?
Well, the Sumerian language is the oldest language that we know about from archaeology, because the very first tablets, written in about 3000 BC or 3200 BC, so that's more than 5,000 years ago, are written in the Sumerian language. And the thing is, the Sumerian language, we can understand quite a lot about it because the Babylonians who came later, they studied these texts and they translated them from Sumerian into Babylonian themselves. So we have these very useful sources. But the language of Sumerian has no modern relatives. And this is quite an interesting thing, because if you speak Italian or French or Spanish, you know that these languages are like cousins. They have strong relations, and if you know one of them well, it's not so difficult to learn another. And the Babylonian language, as I said, is a Semitic language related to Hebrew and Aramaic and Ethiopic. So if you speak one of those languages and you encounter some Babylonian, then that's not so difficult. You can see how it works, which are the nouns, which are the verbs. That's not so difficult. But with Sumerian, it's a whole different matter. And it might as well come from the moon. They have a very complicated way of expressing themselves. So they have an idea in the middle, and they put a bit on one end and a bit next to it and a bit on the other end. You have to kind of disentangle the chain in order to work out what they're talking about. So it is very fascinating for linguists that we have this ancient resource where we can understand increasingly, with a lot of effort, how this very first language that archaeology gives us worked. Of course, it wasn't the first language in the world. People must have been speaking languages for thousands and thousands of years. It wasn't that people grunted and communicated in this kind of fashion. When Homo sapiens was Homo sapiens, there would have been a proper language development with grammar and clarity and so forth. So we can be sure that for hundreds of thousands of years, languages were spoken among the communities of Homo sapiens, of which nothing has survived. And what has happened with us is that when writing appeared for the first time on these funny bits of clay, it was just in time to record this Sumerian language. And probably, if we could go back in time, and we went back to 5000 BC, we might find somebody in Russia or a place like that who was speaking in a language, which has now disappeared, of course, which was a sister to Sumerian. There must have been a whole family of those as well, and all we've got is the last survivor. So it is rather dramatic, but with a lot of very sharp and intelligent people for the last 150 years have worked on these languages and used the resources so that now we understand Sumerian really rather well. So if a real Sumerian, born, say, in 3250 BC, happened to walk through the door and sit down here and had a conversation with me, I could probably get by, although I imagine he would fall off his chair with laughter at my ridiculous pronunciation, and it might take a day or two before he realized what I was talking about. But it's a very exciting thing to come face to face with a language which doesn't have a modern relative, because almost all the languages that we know in the world today do have a relative. They do have somebody elsewhere in the world who speaks a sister language where the vocabulary and the grammar are related, and you can see they come from a remote ancestor which they share in common.
Sumerian not carried on? Why is it lost to us?
Well, everything in the world has its day and it disappears. And in ancient Iraq, the ancient Mesopotamia, which is the land between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, there was a long time when the Sumerians were the main occupants of the country, and they were the people who developed writing for the first time. And with the passage of time, increasingly, nomadic tribes from the west who spoke a Semitic language which became Babylonian in due course, were attracted to the country because it was very well irrigated and very fertile. That's why we call it the Fertile Crescent. They used to call it the Fertile Crescent. And for successive generations, people speaking Semitic languages who were wandering after their flocks or purely nomadic peoples were attracted to this heartland and settled there and became permanent residents. So with the passage of time, speakers of this new Semitic Babylonian language began to outnumber those who spoke the old Sumerian language. And in the course of time, it became like Latin, Sumerian. It was a religious language with lots of sacred texts still using it, but in the marketplace everyone was speaking Babylonian. And this lasted for a very long time, until about 500 BC, in the same part of the world, people started to speak Aramaic and the Babylonians started to disappear. So eventually, when Jesus was born, for example, everyone was speaking Aramaic as their local language and the Babylonian tongue disappeared. So all these things, they have their period of dominance and strength, and then very gradually they either filter out for one or other reason. Sometimes there's warfare with a lot of destruction. Sometimes a government imposes another language and says you can't speak your language anymore. All these factors contribute to nothing lasting forever. And that is the truth about the world. Nothing lasts forever.
And can you translate for us what it says on this tablet?
Well, I can. It's in very small writing, and nobody gave me a word of warning. But what it is, in point of fact, it's a loan of dates. Somebody has undertaken to grow and harvest the dates, which would then, at harvest time, will be he will keep the most of the money that comes from it, but repay the loan to the lender with some kind of benefit. So actually, it's in very small and unpleasant writing. This is not a good example to show the world, to make everybody desire to learn cuneiform, which of course is the whole point of this exercise, because everybody should give up computers, typewriters, biros, all those rubbishy things, get a piece of clay, get a nicely finished and varnished chopstick, learn this writing system and replace it. And I tell you why this is a good idea. Because all the books in the world are going to fall to pieces. And every single thing on a computer is going to disappear and be lost in the course of time. And one day it will be that the tablets in this room are still exactly as they are now. Everybody will come and say, my God, look at this stuff, 5,000 years old, 6,000 years old, still going strong, and all the things which have been invented since will disappear from sight.